Welcome to the LaunchFamily Podcast, where we illuminate real tools for modern family life. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley, a mom of six, former teacher, and passionate ally for kids who learn differently. Our guest today is Dr. Mindy Scirri, a homeschool mom, former professor, and chair of education, and a learning differences specialist who's been empowering students and families to thrive through learnabilities. She'll guide us in understanding how to lean into our kids' strengths, craft personalized learning strategies, and cultivate mindfulness for sustained success. Dr. Scirri, we're so glad you're here.
I am very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, and I know we've had you on a previous episode too, but I'm super excited to dive into everything about learnabilities today. So, can you take us back to the beginning? What sparked, the ideas or the mission behind learnabilities, and how did you move from teacher, educator to learning differences consultant and homeschool coach?
Okay. Well, it actually started, I got a position as a professional tutor at a community college. And so I just they put me in with all the students with accommodations in one-on-one sessions. And I started to work with students, and it was really exciting because I was able to work with them to sort of understand the puzzle of their learning, try to figure out how they learn so I could help them. And so I really found like, okay, this is what I want to do. And so then I went to school and for learning disabilities program and then special education and all of that. And I worked on a reading intervention research project, Dr. Benita Blackman in Syracuse. And I was just like, now I have some tools to help, these students. And when I moved back to Western New York, um, needed to do something that was, not just, kind of staying home and doing something, and I wanted to be able to help students. So I started learnabilities in our 3rd bedroom, and we just had, like, kind of, did some flyers in the newsletters and in newspapers, and we got some people to come and that's how it started. And then while I was working with clients, I did work with nonprofits, and I actually got a position as a professor and eventually chair of education at a university where I was working with future teachers, special ed and general ed. And I did that for about 10 years. And now I'm back to kind of just working with clients, doing consulting, doing trainings for school districts, things like that. And my daughter and I started a website called learnabilities.net where we're trying to capture strategies and resources for those who learn differently. So it's been kind of an interesting journey.
Yeah, it sounds like full circle too, like from that those initial stages of just experiencing that as an educator to then like teaching teachers and then now you're, circling back to the families and providing resources to schools as well. So you've emphasized 3 pillars, so empowerment, strategies, and mindfulness. Can you define each of those for us and then also explain why they matter?
Okay, so part of, I think, being an educator, or I guess just being a person, you surround yourself with people who know things, right? And so all of these pieces really come from some of the colleagues and the experiences I've had with working with different people. So starting with empowerment, I'm going to use the framework from Dr. Ellen Arnold. She has 5 keys to empowerment, and that's really kind of a mindset for people to use when they're teaching and learning. So when we can help students feel empowered, then we're going to be increasing and improving the learning experience. And the 5 pillars are our self-knowledge, really an understanding of ourself, our strengths and challenges, strategies, knowing what tools we can use to overcome our challenges using our strengths, involvement and choice, which is really that feeling of having some control over our learning, having some choices and being able to make those choices that really align with our strengths and challenges. And then belief in self, which is that confidence, that feeling that we can succeed, which kind of comes from some of these other keys as well. And then finally, self advocacy. So that is the ability to say, okay, I understand my strengths and challenges, this is what I need, and to be able to ask for those things in an appropriate way. So basically, empowerment is a healthy mindset for teachers and learners, and it really builds that kind of feeling that we can be successful, and that's what we really need when we're learning. Strategies is obviously part of empowerment, but I want to reference some things from Dr. Lynn Meltzer, who is the founder of Research ILD. and the SMARTS executive function curriculums. And really, we're talking about strategies as methods of doing something that fit what we know about ourselves. And they are also things that don't take a whole lot of extra time and things that actually work. So we want to have strategies, and we all use strategies. And so part of this learning and teaching kind of framework is that we can help students identify the strategies that are most likely to work for them, and then they build this strategy toolbox. One of my colleagues, Michael Grushler, he calls them adult superpowers because it's not things we just use when we're in school, right? When we're doing this particular task. These are things that we are going to use for everything, for life. And so the importance is that we need strategies to meet our goals. We have we have our strengths, and maybe we don't need to use strategies in those particular areas, but there are always some things that are a little more difficult, and we may need some tools to help us with those things. And the last one is mindfulness. And again, I'm going to reference Dr. Larry Force from Mount St. Mary's and Teresa Drone from Parent Network of Western New York. And they got me kind of involved in this mindfulness training for families with um, individuals with disabilities and caretakers. And it's called Proactive Caring. And it basically looks at all of these different techniques for building mindfulness in individuals and in their caretakers. And it's kind of a really important piece to learning because you need to be in the present. So mindfulness is really you're in the present moment. You're not worried about or anxious or thinking about or dwelling in the past and what happened and all those prior experiences. And you're not anxious about the future. You're not worried about what might happen. How am I going to do on this test? All of those things. So it's a really, again, a healthy mindset that supports teaching and learning from both the teacher perspective and the student. When your teacher is in the present moment, they're really attentive to what's happening in that learning experience, and the student is as well. So it's really important that both the teacher and the learner are using mindfulness in a particular learning experience.
Thank you so much for all of that information too. And I think, we've heard those kind of buzzwords and everyone kind of has a different definition or like in a different context, it means something different. And so I appreciate you taking the time to give us that kind of clear lens for a conversation today. And, since the podcast, like we're talking to parents and things today, what are some of the ways that those pillars might show up in their daily life with their kids? Like if they're their child's first teacher at home, what are some ways that they might see those empowerment or strategies like executive functioning strategies or mindfulness moments, I guess, in their day to day?
So, I mean, empowerment really shows up in everything we do because it's kind of a feeling of being able to accomplish things. It's a confidence. It's all of those things. So when you see, maybe in the home, a child who's really wants to be involved in household decisions, like wants to get engaged in the different things that are happening in the household, those types of things. You could take each of the 5 keys and think about how it applies in the home, but basically that's that child's ability to feel like involved and that they have some strengths to offer, that they have some purpose in the home. And in learning, it's sort of similar, but we might see it more as like a willingness and to persist. Like we're gonna not be, devastated if something's a little bit more challenging. We're going to keep trying. We feel like we can do it, and so we have that extra little grit to kind of keep going, that resilience. So those are some ways we'll see empowerment, even if doesn't matter the task. It can be a household task, it can be an extracurricular activity, whatever it is. Strategies, it's the way we think about how we do things, right? So, I think it's really easy to identify what we call in the Smarts at Home program with at Research ILD, we call them anti-strategies, right? The things that we keep doing for some reason, but they don't work, right? And so I think about, and I just did this today. I went shopping and I didn't have a real list, no coupons, and I was hungry. That's
Mm,
a terrible strategy, right?
we've all been there though too. It's like that
Terrible.
moment.
And you know that's not a good strategy. And of course it's costly because you end up buying all these things you don't need. But that's the thing, like it's understanding that, you have ways of doing things and some things are effective and efficient and all of that. And some of them are not. And so it's kind of that analysis. Um, with learning, you might see strategies really be important for like homework or, if you're homeschooling and kind of everything that the student's doing academically. And it's that kind of confidence through just difficult tasks because students feel they have tools. So, okay, yes, I know this is a challenging task, but I have a strategy for it. I know how to do this successfully. And so it takes down all of that frustration, that feeling of being overwhelmed because we know how to do this successfully. And mindfulness is a really kind of neat one because, if you are more mindful as a parent, you're going to be a little bit calmer. You're going to be, and that trickles to other people, but, in the household. So there's kind of a calmness, but you can use it specifically to maybe start your day in the right way. Maybe use a little breathing technique in the morning just to kind of, calm down, get centered. You can use it to help yourself get to sleep at night, to calm down, things like that. Um, for learning, it's really being ready to learn, having that right mindset. Like, sometimes with my clients, I would do, they'd be coming from coming from school to do more school, right? And so they're already kind of they already did you know, all this stuff during the day. Maybe they took the bus and then they had to come right to see me or something like that. So sometimes I would start with just a little bit of mindfulness before we even got started, just to get them back and be ready to learn. So some of that is being ready and open to that learning experience through mindfulness. So yeah.
Oh, I love this. And, my background is as an educator as well. And I primarily taught kinder through second grade. And I think one of the things that comes to mind is like the time of day is like those transition moments, right? Of like, okay, we're starting the day, we're transitioning to like maybe a special class or extracurricular thing through that's happening, or maybe we're coming in from lunch and recess, or maybe we're gearing up towards the end of the day when we have a little bit more of a reflection and a calm down breathing activity before we go out to get on buses or parent pickup.
Right.
And then I think too, like in the home, another big piece that we have, I mean, we have 6 children, and so when we go grocery shopping, it's always like, "Okay, we know that people are gonna stop. We know that people are gonna look at us. We know that people are gonna probably come to us." What are some ways that we can, like, center too on the expectations? And so, like, before we
Mm.
go in, we usually sit in the car for, like, 2, 3 minutes, and we're like, "Okay, here we go. Let's,
Uh-huh.
like, make sure we're all in the same mode. We're going in to get groceries. We're coming back out to the car." And setting that expectation is very helpful for them too, because like in the car, things can get a little crazy with conversations and things. And so, uh,
Yep.
yeah, it's good to just prepare for the transition that's coming. Um,
And that doesn't change the older they get, so it
I
doesn't.
mean, my oldest is only 9 right now, so like I
Right,
don't
right.
know what all the way is ahead of me, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
anticipate that they'll be this way for a while. I do want to kind of go deeper on each one of these three pillars as well. So I want to start with empowerment. Um, I think, one of those big things that comes up is maybe you have a neurodivergent learner, right? And so then how does this kind of all fit together with how can they feel empowered to speak up if something isn't making sense or if they need an additional support or tool or extra time in the classroom, but then also maybe at home and understanding how maybe routines or, systems that you might have in the household, how they could be empowered to be part of that too.
So, I mean, I think I wanna, look at each of the 5 keys because I think they're all really crucial and they all fit together. My focus always is on, the self-knowledge, the self-understanding. And in my practice and what I've been doing, I've always used multiple intelligence theory, but you can use a lot of different things. But it gives a nice language for talking about strengths. So really, the idea that you're smart in different ways. You're not just smart or not smart, and so it gives students that feeling that okay, well, I'm good at football. Now that's important because now I can use what makes me good at football to also make me good at academics. And so they start to see themselves as smart, maybe not in the traditional school, subjects and do that, but they can think about themselves as smart and having all these strengths that then can help them with the areas that might be more of a challenge. Um, and then I talked about strategies as being these tools, that we can use to overcome challenges. So that builds, when I talk to students, I always ask them, kind of, are you smart? And I get no a lot, right? They just overgeneralize this idea of being smart. And then, we talk about, what are you good at? And I get a lot of, nothings. And so this whole idea of being able to identify our strengths and be able to then say, okay, but I do have challenges. We're not going to ignore those challenges, but it's not all that we are. And so when we have strategies, we can say, okay, we do have challenges, but we're going to use our strengths and we're going to use these strategies and we're going to be able to overcome them. And so it kind of starts to build this really confidence. Um, and then we have this involvement in choice where we start to have more of a role in learning. And so you can do that. You can build involvement in by asking students, to have choices in their learning. Do you want to try this strategy or this strategy? Do you want to, it can be simple and, do you want to use this pen or this highlighter or whatever? Just more and more choices where students have to make those decisions and feel more involved. My favorite example is like, with kids, which vegetable would you like for dinner? You don't really care which one they have, but as long as they have a vegetable. But just by simply choosing, they're more likely to actually eat it. And so we're building all this more involvement and then belief in self. They start to have more confidence, more resilience, more persistence, and they start to see themselves as being successful. And then now we know how we learn. We can ask for what we need, and part of that is just helping them understand an appropriate way to ask for things. So all of this is really important for our neurodiverse learners who may have had, more struggles, more challenges with academics, and they may be really hyper focused on their challenges. And so the empowerment is really, really crucial for these learners.
Yeah. How can parents take that next step in helping their child like understand their strengths? And I mean, of course, acknowledge the challenges, but as you had mentioned, that probably comes up, has already come up before. So, and I think we've talked about this on another podcast episode as well. But as a society, we tend to focus on deficits, right? Like you get a math tutor if you're struggling with math, you don't get like an extra football practice or like coaching session if you're great at football. Like we're very focused on how can we like get everything up to where it needs to be, or is all good enough? And
Mhm.
so maybe what are some of the ways that parents can reframe that to kind of focus more on those strengths, not to negate the challenges, but maybe to have a little bit more balance there.
So, when I think about some of the families I've worked with, I've had some. So what I like to do is I might begin or end with working on something that the student may already be good at. And so some of the families have kind of called me out on that. Like, okay, you're here to, we really need help with math. Why are you doing something with, language? And my reaction to that, my response to that is, we can't just work on those challenges. We have to build up the strengths as well. And that's part of empowerment, but it's also part of that being able to see beyond those challenges. So, when we think about how can we understand a student's strengths, help them understand their own strengths, we first of all have to notice those strengths, make comments on those strengths, like talk about those strengths. and not only have conversations about those challenges, so if a child is really good with artwork, really spending probably more attention to when that student is actually succeeding and saying, wow, you really tell me about this painting or whatever. um Rick Lavoie would say, give students as much opportunities to use those strengths as possible. And and I'm trying to remember the exact example. It's something about like if your child is really good at like putting screws in the chairs, like take out all the screws every day, like kind of this
Yeah.
um, kind of bananas example. But the idea is that whatever your child is good at, giving plenty of opportunities for that child to do that particular thing. And I've seen too many examples where, academics are going down and parents will say something like, well, if you don't get your grades up, you can no longer do cheerleading. Well, if that's the strength, that's not going to be really helpful to take away the opportunities to do the really good things. So we really have to be careful that we focus a lot of attention on those strengths, not negating the challenges, but still, really helping to identify for those kids the what are their strengths, and then encouraging not only just practice of those strengths, but just building and improving on those strengths as well, which will help them overcome those challenges.
Yeah. And then I guess too, like from the student's perspective, any favorite techniques that come to mind for encouraging kids to, advocate for themselves?
I have a funny example for this. So, whenever I would go to grocery store, I guess this is the theme of the day. I would have my kids, you know, go up to the grocery store worker, whoever it was, and ask like, "Where are the raisins?" Nobody can ever find the raisins, right? And ask for something, and I would make my kids do this in front of me so I could see how they did it, and then we would talk about how they asked, and maybe a better way to phrase the question and to thank you and all that stuff. Um, and so it's like helping them learn how to ask for what they need, but in an appropriate way. They don't go up to the worker and just say, "Where are the raisins?" It has to be a little bit more nuanced, and, helping them understand that. Dr. Ellen Arnold, she would give this example of kind of creating situations where kids need to ask for what they need. So, for example, you might give kids a task and you might not provide all the materials they need or not enough time to do it, and then not letting the kids suffer, but then saying, "Oh, would it be nice if you had this particular material to do this task, or if you had 5 more minutes to do this task, or whatever," and then encouraging them to actually ask you for it, and then talk about how they asked. And so you're providing opportunities to build that self advocacy in safe, supported ways, so that when they find out, they're in a different situation without you, they know, this is an appropriate way to ask for something, and that they should, not just suffer and not have enough time, not have the components, not know where the raisins are, but they should be able to, ask for what they need.
Yeah. I love that you brought up like the different contexts too, like the grocery store, that is rooted in real life, right? Like they're gonna eventually, as an adult, have to go to the grocery store. They may have to ask where something is. And so that's a great like life skill in addition to that. I think another example that came to mind as you were describing that is like restaurants.
Mhm,
Like in ordering your own meal or like asking for a refill of your drink or your water is like, there's the manners around that. You also have to identify the right person to ask at a restaurant. You
mhm,
might be seeing like multiple different waiters or waitresses around.
mhm.
And so that's another kind of like real life rooted example that I think comes to mind. But I love this idea too of, giving them that little bit of like struggle space to be able to recognize when they do need to ask for something. One of the things that we've experienced at our house is like there's these periods of obsessions with Band-Aids. Like, Band-Aids are like stickers sometimes in our home, or we have, like, 6 of them on at a time. And then we go through, like, the Band-Aid drought where we just have, like, 500 Band-Aids in the drawer because oh, apparently Band-Aids aren't cool anymore. But that was one of the things that we worked on with from a really young age. It's like, "Okay, if you get a scratch, like, this is how we take care of this."
Mhm.
practicing, how to ask for help or like offering help to someone
Mhm.
if you notice that they're hurt.
Yeah, yeah,
So, oh,
absolutely.
all good things and strategies for parents to be thinking about to try with their kids if they're not already. But I want to kind of shift gears and talk about the strategies pillar and go a little bit more detailed because I know that parents are probably overwhelmed with generic tips on, oh, this is what you could do, try this strategy, and
Mhm.
oh, this is for my 8-year-old. So, how do you help families identify strategies that actually fit the needs of their child?
So, uh, through my practice, I've used what's called strength-based assessment. There's a lot. Dr. Ellen Arnold has a lot of information on that with her books and things like that. But so basically, you know, talking with students, watching students, really doing some like diagnostic teaching with students to really figure out what their strengths are. Yeah, obviously the challenges as well, but really understanding the child in front of you, right? And so I will be offering that assessments on my website. So stay tuned for that, where I can help then guide parents as to how to use that information. But in general, if you pay attention to your child and when they're succeeding and when they're having difficulties, you can start to build the picture together. Um, and you can understand the strengths and challenges, and then you can identify strategies that are most likely to work because every strategy doesn't work for every child. And as an educator, you have to build kind of this educator toolbox of things that you could try, right? And as maybe a home educator, you would have similar things. um, but not every strategy is going to work for your child. So a lot of it is really knowing your child, knowing those strengths and challenges and what strategies, first of all, are needed. What are the challenges? What are the strategies that we need? Then you can go do maybe some research on what types of strategies are out there. But then thinking too about, strengths and preferences and all of those things. So many students I talk to, especially like high schoolers, I have a test. What are you going to do to study for it? I'm going to read the chapter over and over again, or my notes over and over again. Well, that's great, but your difficulty is in reading. So why would you choose that particular strategy for studying for a test? So knowing yourself and knowing the strategies that are out there, you have to be able to kind of make that match. So talking with the child is really important, having them identify, as Alan Arnold would say, the stop signs, right? Where are we getting stuck on this long division problem? Where are we getting stuck in this particular concept? Or whatever it is. And then what feels easy? Where are you feeling like really confident and really starting to understand that and working with the child to understand that, and then deciding, okay, let's try a strategy. And then when we try a strategy, the really, really super important piece is to then go and reflect on that strategy. So, did it work? Did it not work? Was it used in the wrong situation? Could I tweak it? Could I change it a little bit and maybe then it'll be more successful? Or do I really need to change my strategy? Being hungry and going to the grocery store, not a good strategy. You just need to scrap that one, right? But that takes, it takes executive function to do that. It takes cognitive flexibility to understand that I have to change something and to be able to do that. And sometimes that's difficult. So there's a lot going on always with learning and teaching and learning. But if we can help identify what's more likely to work and then try it and really think about it afterwards, that's kind of the process where we start to identify the strategies in the toolbox for that particular child.
So helpful. It doesn't mean you have to scrap it completely. It could be like a little modification or a tweak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's also really eye-opening too, because I think as parents, we're inundated with different tips, tricks, hacks, whatever you want to call it, especially from like social media now. And it's like, oh yeah, well that worked for them. It must work for me. If it doesn't work, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible parent. There's something wrong with me. And it's like, oh no, it might just not have been the right fit for you.
Mhm.
child, or maybe you need to tweak it a little.
Exactly, exactly. And our website, that's the goal of it, is to try to create kind of a collection of strategies and resources for people to look through, to say, okay, that might work, this might work, to try things, with the knowledge of their child. So that and if you find something that really works, to share it with us, and we'll try to build and build and build. So we have this wonderful collection for people to you know look through and sift through and try to find things that work. That's kind of the goal of the whole thing.
Incredible. Well, I know for our listeners that are listening in that want to connect, we'll make sure that we include that link in the show notes as well. So be sure to check that out. I want to wrap up with like this really conversation around mindfulness, right? Like we've heard that in different contexts. Why is mindfulness essential in supporting children, especially those with executive functioning challenges?
So part of it is kind of keeping that right mindset, right? And so if things start to feel overwhelmed, if students start to feel frustrated, they get to a point where executive function is just going to break down. They're not going to be able to do what they need to do. So you could use there's kind of literature about lizard brain versus wizard brain, right? So
Mhm.
when we're doing academic tasks and we're in a good space, we're using our wizard brain, we're really calm, we have this kind of cool executive function going on, right? But when we see something that triggers kind of that flight or fight, we're like, that big math problem or whatever, and we feel like, we're kind of in this panic state, and we might have this lizard brain kind of turn on. And that's where we feel stressed, we feel frustrated, and so we can't really do what we need to do. Mindfulness can set the stage to sort of prevent that from, starting, but it also, in the moment, you can use mindfulness to calm down. So you can use some of the breathing techniques, you can use, some of the body relaxation techniques to really you know calm the nerves, all of that, and some visualization you can use to see success. You can use the different techniques in mindfulness to bring yourself back to the present moment, that where nothing's really dangerous. We're not really worried about things happening. So it's really a way to keep our learning centered, and ourselves in a place that's really going to be open for learning. So, and then when you combine that with, especially strategies for executive function, I'll give a little shout out to my other podcast on the executive function and the smarts at home, where we can build those strategies, and executive function will all help to keep that wizard brain going, and keep everything in that calm moment. So using them all together, it all fits kind of nicely together.
Love it. Love it. Well, any simple, like for families that may be new to mindfulness, any simple like mindfulness practices that families could maybe integrate today in their home?
So I would definitely check out the Proactive Caring website, because it gives like detailed descriptions of different mindfulness techniques and how to do them with videos and everything.
Oh, amazing.
But sometimes it's just a simple taking time to breathe. If you could take 1 minute and just like literally time it and do nothing and just focus on your breathing, it will seem, if you are a busy person, it will seem like it's hours, but it's 1 minute, and you can actually feel calmer with just doing that, just focusing on your breathing, breathing deep, having your belly kind of come out as you breathe. That real kind of deep breathing, it can calm you down. And so it can be something that becomes part of your routine, maybe something that you do in the morning, something before bed, something when you need to calm down. You can practice being in the present moment. For example, a lot of us will maybe eat and we won't really think about what's going into our bodies or something like that. You might be like really in the moment and think about, okay, I'm putting this in my mouth. Like I'm really focusing on that. You're doing a task like the dishes. You really focus on, the feel of the soap. You're focusing on the sound of the water. You can train yourself to be more in the present moment, doing the typical things that you do. It doesn't have to be, you know, an hour and a half meditation or anything like that. It's being in the present moment, kind of discarding those thoughts about the past and the future. Not that you don't want to plan for anything. That's not what we're saying. But that you're discarding those intrusive thoughts. You're acknowledging them, and then you're like, okay, moving on. We're in the present moment. And then you do things like a body scan before you go to bed. Like you're relaxing different parts of your body in succession, so that by the end you've kind of captured all parts of your body and you're really, really relaxed, and then you can fall asleep. I mean, it can be used in so many different ways in the things that you're already doing in your day.
That sounds great. I mean, as a busy parent, it's like, oh, wait, I have to add one more thing to my list of things to practice. It's like, oh, maybe just a mindset shift in the moment can also kind of help you hit some of those goals and practice those skills. So we'll make sure that we link that resource as well in the show notes for our listeners listening in. Um, with the podcast, we typically end with some questions from our guest and from our Launch Family community. And so I want to get your perspective on a couple questions here. So the first question from the parent is, my child gets overwhelmed with school demands. What first step should we take? So how could we maybe use empowerment and mindfulness to help them begin that journey?
So I would always say to start with that self-knowledge, because, if we're being overwhelmed, then maybe we're not really truly aware of the things that we have going for us. So really understanding those strengths and challenges is a super important first step, in my opinion. Then we can use mindfulness to sort of, again, create that space to learn prior to doing something. When there's something to do for school, creating that mindset, that relaxed calmness, or using it, if we start to get a little bit, more stressed or overwhelmed, to use that mindfulness to bring us back. Use that breathing technique. You'll find that kids will find their favorites. There are a bunch of different. I'll just give you one example, like this volcano breathing, where you're kind of doing kind of this. Some kids just love that, and they're going to latch on to that particular one, so they breathe in and then breathe out, and it's a whole thing that they can just do whenever they think. But of course, that one maybe is a bigger show. Maybe they want to do something that's a little, each kid's going to have their preferences, so it's finding, again, the strategy, even if it's a mindfulness strategy, that works for your kid, to actually use in those moments when we're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with school demands.
Super helpful. Volcano rests are so fun. I remember
Yeah,
doing them.
they're fun. I mean,
Oh, yes. Little
yeah, yeah,
flashback moment. I
yeah.
love that. The other question that we have from a parent is, we tried tons of apps and tutors and nothing seems to stick. And I assume this maybe means more of like nothing is seeming to work. So
Mhm.
how can parents pivot towards using more personalized strategies that can maybe resonate and be more effective long term?
So if you think about, apps are kind of built for the masses, right? So they may be a little bit more general, and they may not have that personalized touch. And when you think about even tutors, a lot of tutors will focus on, I have to help them with the content, right? I have to help them learn how to do that math problem, or, learn how to write better. And so that's great, and it helps them for that particular maybe task or subject or even grade level. But as you know, things change. We have new tasks, we have maybe even new subjects, but definitely as the grade levels increase, we have more complex and challenging tasks. And so, if we want to think long term, that's where we're talking about really, this understanding of how we learn. So the more your child understands how they learn, the full picture, where, we understand all of our strengths, we understand our preferences, what is the environment that we work best in, you know, we have our challenges and anything like that. We understand that. We understand how our personality affects our learning. We like all of the different pieces, what I would call the learner profile, that the more that the child understands how they learn, the more they can make decisions and strategy choices that will be more effective. And so, then long term, we're looking at, even if it's a new task, a new academic task or a more challenging one, we know how to handle it, what has worked in the past, what we can do in terms of strategy use that will really help us do this particular task. So it's a bigger picture, and it can last their whole, lifelong, basically.
Yeah. I think, like, as you were describing that, one of the things that came to mind was kind of like the idea of like fixing the root cause. Like, if we were talking about like medical things, it's like,
Yeah.
are we just putting a band-aid on the symptom, or are we getting at the root cause of whatever is causing this kind of, misunderstanding, or that's
Hmm.
causing maybe longer term ineffective ineffectiveness. There we go.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, just to kind of wrap our parent brains around what was described, I think that that might be helpful too. But I just want to thank you so much for giving such clarity and heart to the framework of, empowerment strategies, mindfulness that we went through today. It's truly transforming how families nurture their neurodiverse learners and just learners, children in general. It might be helpful for parents as well, just to kind of do a little reflection. To our listeners listening in, if this episode opened possibilities for you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and check the show notes for all of the links to learn abilities and the resources that Dr. Scirri mentioned today. Parenting learners who think differently can feel isolating, but with the right support, insight, and mindset, we all know that your child can thrive. You've got this, and we've got you.